How to destroy your children's faith in 3 simple steps. Number 1, don't allow them to ask any questions. Who is God? Where is heaven? What is the Holy Spirit? Why did Jesus come? Why do we go to church? Because I said so. Ask your mom, things like this. I remember when our children were young, one of our children, when he was like 3, asked this question. He was like, Dad, what did Santa Claus do with God? I was like, well, tell me more about that, son. He's like, well, Santa knows when you're sleeping. He knows when you're awake. He knows when you've done bad things and good things. And so if Santa can do all of that, certainly he's done something to God. And I'm like, oh boy, here we go. And I honestly don't remember my answer to that question. I think I might have just jokingly said, go ask your mom, just so that she could hear that question. Now, I want to be really clear when I'm talking about this, that I'm not just talking about like a one-time mess up where you just, push it off to someone or say, well, I don't have time for that or things like that, where you're just genuinely busy. It's a consistent pattern of not answering questions, of keeping things concealed, of not being transparent, and not taking your children's thoughts seriously, not taking their faith questions seriously, so that they get down the road and they get in their teen years, their early 20 years, and they really don't think they have anyone to talk to because they've tried talking to their parents and they really didn't get an awful lot back. In church, in some church cultures, there is a real resistance to questioning because there's this idea that everything's kind of already been locked down. What is there really to question? Question sure seems like doubt, and we don't want doubt. And so the real hesitancy for questioning is less about having answers than it is about anxiety reduction, that we really don't like to be put in the position of not having the answer or having to really think hard about our own faith. Maybe we as parents sometimes haven't worked out our own faith well enough, and so we don't really have the answers. So, the good answer to that is, if you don't really know, is to say, that's a wonderful question. I'm so glad that you asked. What you're doing is you're reinforcing the fact that questions are good. Questions are not bad. If your kids grow up thinking questions are bad and they have legitimate questions, then they're going to think that the faith community is not the place to go to for answers. They're going to start thinking that their parents are not the go-to place for answers. So allow your kids to ask questions and praise them for it. Say, yes, that is a wonderful question. Sometimes I say to my kids, I have never thought of that before. And then I may say something like, well, I think such and such. Or, the Bible does say this, and I'll show them a verse. But it's one of the best answers you can possibly give is, I don't know, but let's try to find out together. And now what you're doing is not only are you rewarding and giving them a positive experience for taking things they're wondering about and encouraging them to wonder, but you're also then showing them, equipping them in how to find answers through Scripture. And that's a wonderful opportunity. Instead of this being like some kind of anxiety-producing thing, like where that comes from is this feeling like I'm insufficient. My own child asked me a faith question and I didn't have the answer, so I got defensive because I don't feel sufficient. And so instead of trying to reward them for good things and try to engage them in a process of discovery, I have shut them down in an effort to make my anxiety level come back down. And that is a way to teach our children that the faith community is not the place to ask your questions. Now, this doesn't only happen in the home, this also happens in the church, where they raise their hand in Bible class and they ask some kind of question to the teacher. And sometimes teachers have the same anxiety as the parents. And they may say, well, we don't really ask questions like that, or why on earth would you ask a question like that? Or everyone already knows that. And so they're being belittled or demeaned for bringing their legitimate questions, gaps in their knowledge, to the faith community, to people who are supposed to be teachers and mature in their faith, and maybe somewhat probably are, and not getting any answers back. It seems like they're holding back. It seems like there's either secrets or there's ignorance, and no one wants to be transparent about that, and that's a huge turnoff for kids. Now, the second step in totally destroying your children's faith is in how you talk about God's people. It's in how you talk about church, as in the worship service on Sunday. It's in how you talk about Christian friends. It's in how you talk about the preacher. It's in how you talk about the elders. And one of the prime examples of this is the Sunday morning car ride home. I can't believe the preacher would say that. Can you believe what his wife was wearing? I can't believe the elders would make such a boneheaded decision. You can never trust those guys. And what you're doing is you're venting your frustrations in front of your children, and you're casting the church in such a negative light that it may be that that's all the feedback they ever hear about church. While at the same time, they also hear you saying, church is absolutely important. You're going to have to be there every time the doors are open. This is the most important thing in your life. But when they hear you talk about it, what they're hearing you say are harsh criticisms. so that it doesn't really have continuity or integrity in their minds to find a consistent path through. This is something you must do, and it's terrible. So we need to find opportunities to not just air everything in front of our children, but sometimes there may be something that you can bring up and say, this was something that happened at church, and it's not really something that I agree with, but we're going to learn to get along. Or, maybe I'm going to have a conversation with someone about that. This is how we reconcile things. You see, when there's problems at church, it's not about just airing dirty laundry. It's about trying to show our kids how to engage an issue or engage a person or reconcile a situation. So you see that shift in our thinking. It's a crucial shift. And it's a shift from tearing apart their faith to equipping them to build and grow their own faith. So now you've taken opportunity not just to say, well, something happened that I didn't like. They sang too many songs we didn't know. They sang too fast. They sang too slow. The song leader pitched it too high. Take all that and turn that into something better. You can say, it's not always just the way I like it, but I love God's people, and I'm going to be patient, and I'm going to be forbearing with the people in the congregation because this is so important to my life that I have to make adjustments. And that will allow your children then to learn how to reconcile things and how to make adjustments whenever they encounter things that they don't understand or that they don't like, because you've already encouraged them to ask questions and you've already shown them how to find answers. Now you're showing them how to work and deal with in life situations that are not to your liking or not ideal. You need to build up the preacher and the elders before your children, not to say and act like they're perfect, but just to say that these are people who are worthy of respect, who are in positions that we need to pay attention to, who have studied and who are sharing out of their heart, and we need to be patient and kind with them. Preachers go through hard times. Preachers have hard Sundays. They may have just done a really tough couple funerals the day before, and they're coming in absolutely drained, and then they're delivering this message. Well, that preacher just didn't seem to have it today. Well, guess what he went through yesterday? Or guess what kind of conversation he had on the ride to church this morning. So that car ride home is often a place where the seeds are planted for the later destruction of the faith of our children. And we have to be very cognizant of how we're talking and what our kids are hearing. Again, not to cover things up, not to lack transparency, but you need to use discernment and you need to have integrity. Because if you're going to show your kids that church is essential, it's mandatory, it's the most important thing in your life, then they also need to hear you living like that's true. They need to hear you talking like that's true. Kids can spot a fake from 1,000 miles away. Very hard to pull one over on children. And when children find inconsistencies or discrepancies, big red flags, big time turn off. They're not going to want to be any part of that. As parents, we have to be able to model what it looks like to be imperfect people. This is the third step. If you always act like you're perfect, you always put the blame back on your kids, and any trouble or any problem there ever was, that you're, as the parent, are exceptional and above the rules, then they're going to see that inconsistency in your life, and they're never going to learn how to own their own problems. They're never going to learn how to apologize, and they're never going to learn how to reconcile things with people. So if dad's always right, or dad always gets his way, or there's no questioning dad, etc., then what you're going to find are children who are going to grow up doing the same things, who are going to be incorrectable, incorrigible, friendless. And so here's the thing. Your kids know you're not perfect. And so if you act like you're perfect when you're not, and you don't take your faith seriously when you tell them to, it lacks integrity. And integrity is not perfection. Integrity is consistency of character, of trying to do the right thing. So that whenever you do something wrong, you go back to your children and you say, Dad realizes that he's not perfect, and I'm sorry for the thing that I did. I apologized to my children last night because of my attitude, me personally, literally last night, because of my attitude at the dinner table, because I was frustrated by a few things, because I was dealing with things that had nothing to do with my kids. And I was being passive-aggressive at the dinner table. So I went to my wife and I went to my boys who are 10 and 12, and I addressed this with them last night. And I apologized for my behavior, because whenever they act like that, they're going to have to apologize. They need to see that in me as well. I have to lead the way. I have to model that for them. These are some things that, we may not think really hard about when we're saying them or doing them, but we need to be very intentional to have integrity, to find consistency, which also means we understand our own mistakes and we apologize for them. and we model for our kids how to reconcile things, how to ask for forgiveness, and how to give forgiveness so that they know how to live a life in faith in a community that's not perfect, among people who are not perfect, as they are not perfect, in an environment where they are welcome to explore and discover and ask questions. And by the way, find out that a question that we have no answer for does not make their faith worse. It just makes God the greater and mysterious God who sometimes is above answers to our questions. That does not diminish faith. And sometimes we're so hesitant to say, I don't know, because we think that that diminishes faith. The I don't know prompts exploration and discovery, and that's what builds a faith of our own. So these three things disconnect our children from being able to find a faith of their own, to be able to build a faith of their own that is robust, so that when they go off to college and they run into a professor who will not listen to their questions and is not safe to talk to, they're going to know that that is not like the church they grew up in, that that is not like the home they grew up in, that in that academic environment, it may not be open to exploration as their home was and as their church was. And so if your home and your church are open to exploration, and then they launch out into a world that is not open to exploration, guess who they're going to believe has the more integrity? So mom, dad, studies have shown that you are number one and number two in the spiritual influencers of the lives of your children. We sometimes think, oh, that's the youth minister's number one. That's the preacher's number one. That's someone else's number one. And we farm off other people to do our job. The buck stops with us. We have to do our job. And that means we're going to fail. That means we're going to sometimes not do this correctly. But don't allow that to be a consistent pattern, which then becomes a culture of secrecy, a culture of pride and arrogance, a culture of perfection culture, a culture that completely lacks discovery, completely lacks growth and maturity, and has no room for doubt. This is not the kind of home we want. This is not the kind of church that we want. And so that's 3 easy steps for you to absolutely kill the faith of your child. And it's just planting seeds. None of it's just directly like screaming at them. And that's what makes it so subtle, right? So failure to let them discover through asking their own questions in order to preserve our own anxiety levels. Number 2 is how you talk about things, that you need to talk about things with consistency so that on that car ride home, they're not just hearing you air your dirty laundry in a way that never reconciles anything, that week in and week out, you keep saying the same aggravated things that allows them just to think church is terrible, but it's mandatory, and this makes no sense. And third is just acting like you don't have any problem. Acting as a parent like you're never at fault. Acting as a parent that there's never anything to forgive or to be forgiven of, and so that the rules don't apply to you. The children can sniff that inconsistency out. If you're not living out your faith, and that does not mean be perfect, then your children will not live out their faith. Your children will not most likely exceed the faith level of their parents. Some do, but it's exceptional. So let us live with consistency, let us live with integrity, and let us raise a generation who knows how to find the answers and search and dig and own their own faith. It is vitally important. Thank you so much for watching. Love you. God bless. Please subscribe. Follow along. It's going to be more. It's going to be practical. It's going to be intentional. It's going to help grow your faith. It's going to help equip you and train you. And so you don't have to rely on other people to do it for you. And I love the fact that you're here. God bless you. See you soon.